Hey guys, VaulSC here. Hope that you're having a great week. Today we're going to be talking about White Banner, which is a sectorial you can play in Infinity. It is one of the YuJing Sectorials. It's the newest one. For a while, they really only had Imperial Service, that expanded to Invincible Army, and then more recently, White Banner. White Banner is the only sectorial to make use of the Shaolin monks, although unfortunately they don't make very much use of them, not as much as we thought they would. But the good thing about it is that you do have access to the Zangchis Fireteam Core, which you can support with a heavy infantry unit. And you still have the Guilans, you still have the war bands, you still have a lot of access to remote availability, so they are probably my favorite and most interesting YuJing Sectorial, which is why I want to focus on them today and run you through them. So we're going to be talking about the profiles, the stats, the strategy and the tactics. Stick with me if you are a YuJing player and you'd like to branch out to White Banner, or if you're just curious about the sectorial, or maybe if you want to go all in on the faction. Right, so we're going to be using Army 7 here. We're going to be going through the profiles, watch with me and maybe open your own version of the app so you can have a look at it yourself. Before we go into the actual profiles though, a lot of you have told me that you quite like the purchasing advice that I do on some of these vids, so we're going to jump to that now. And we're going to answer the question which many a new player likes to ask when they're first starting out, and that is, what do I buy? You're looking at the models and you're thinking, well, so many of the models look awesome, but one of my goals here is to actually eventually enter tournaments and beat up my friends and generally feel like the models that I'm painting up aren't somehow handicapped and gimped and leaving me with a underwhelming experience when I come to compete on the tabletop. So what my advice is going to be is obviously focused on the miniatures which are going to serve you well on the tabletop and actually make a distinction between ones that will and ones that don't. A lot of you guys come to my reviews just because I'll tell you which models kind of suck and are currently underpowered. Very few other people on the internet are keen to do that, so here we go. Now, if you're starting out with YuJing, you can go and get their classic starter set, which has some Zangchis, it has the Xian Warrior, stuff like that. That's not particularly focused for White Banner because the Xian Warrior can't be used. There's also the Celestial Guard Imperial Service starter set. There is the Invincible Army set. Neither of those are optimal just because they are for the other sectorials, and you're basically spending your money on some miniatures that can't really be used for White Banner unless you proxy. Which is why it's kind of inevitable that you're probably going to be starting with the YuJing half of Operation Kaldstrom. This was a starter pack that came out a while ago that has Pan-Oceania stuff and YuJing stuff in it. And what a lot of people like to do is they go halves with a friend. So if you know somebody else who wants to start Pan-Oceania, you guys both pay half, you get the box, you trade the miniatures between you. Or you buy the whole thing yourself and you start both sectorials, or maybe you buy the whole set for yourself and then you sell off the Pan-Oceania half. But the main thing is it's got these guys in it. All of these troopers are going to be playable in the sectorial. All of them are very useful and quite powerful and viable in your list, except for maybe the Jujak. I'm not the hugest fan of the Jujak, but at least he is reasonable. He's not completely terrible. Like, you're not completely wasting points if you happen to have him. Whereas the Zangchis are going to be very useful for your core fire team. The Guilan is excellent. The Hondun is also a strong piece, and the Daofei, very reasonable. So if you own these miniatures and you painted it up to a beautiful standard, you're well on your way to getting started with the sectorial. Now, branching out, this box of remotes might not seem like the most interesting thing in the world. You'd probably be wanting to buy the cool-looking, power-armored super soldiers with their guns. These remotes, though, will be in all of your lists for all time. So if you buy these and make them your very first, thing that you start painting, you're going to thank me later, because these guys can be assembled in different ways and have gun assortment attachments that can even be magnetized. And the thing about the faction is that you can have the flash pulse bots, which are cheap cheerleaders defending your deployment zone with their flash pulse ability, and you have the sensor bot, which is possible to take them as well. You have the TR bot. You even have the smart missile launcher bot, which is viable in this sectorial, and of course the newer YuJing remotes, which other factions don't get. The guys with the Panzerfaust and the Flamen Spears and the mine laying ability. If you went out and bought 3 of these packs so you could assemble 6 remotes, I would not consider that to be a mistake. If you bought 1 pack, I might actually say that you've bought too few. I would recommend getting at least 2 boxes of this if you're serious about playing YuJing and White Banner in general, just because they really do support the rest of your army so well, because obviously they provide orders, they're relatively cheap, you can take the more important expensive stuff that actually is very order hungry, and you really make a more robust army list that way. The support pack is kind of necessary, especially if you're going to be playing White Banner, because they don't have access to any of the mercenaries that can do healing and engineering. So having an engineer with a helper bot, a Yao Zhao repair bot, for all of the remotes that I just mentioned, that's going to be extremely important, especially since you're going to be putting some of those remotes out with a open presence where they're actually providing arrows and going to get shot back at. The great thing about this tactic is that if you have a wall and your bot is just peeking out from behind the wall, it's going to take some damage, but it's got remote presence, so it's going to take actually 3 wounds to destroy it completely. If they only do 1 or 2 wounds to it, it's just going to drop prone behind the wall. They can't shoot it anymore. You then revive it with your engineer, it pops back up, and it starts using its long-range guns again. That's a very, very strong tactic, but it's not possible unless you have this engineer. Also, we're going to be talking about heavy infantry use in this faction. Heavy infantry really do need a doctor because you're investing so many points into them. They can take a lot of punishment, but if you drop down to unconscious and can't be healed back, you're really wasting a good opportunity. So having a doctor, again with a Yao Zhao bot there to spread her presence and her capability around the battlefield is very important. So this support pack, I think, is really, really important. Next up, a lot of you guys are going to be extremely pleased that I'm actually recommending this box, because I know that you guys love the miniatures and you want to play the sectorial just for these guys. Normally I wouldn't recommend stuff like this because there are other more practical things that you need, but in this particular case, Corvus Belli have actually made the Shang Jin so powerful now and so useful that you really can get away with buying this box set. When you first buy them as a new player, you're probably going to be running all 3 of them just because you want to play what you have. You're going to be proud of how well you painted them. And as you become more and more experienced, you'll want, to free up more points in your list to take other things. You'll probably drop down to 2. And then when you're really competing hard at high level, you may only actually have 1. And that's probably the HMG version, to be honest. But don't stop that from actually buying the box set. All of these miniatures are actually very, very useful. And the profiles, which we'll get to talking about later for the HMG and the rocket launcher, are really standout profiles because of their stats and because of what they actually do in the army strategically and their tactical awareness or ability. This Shaolin Warrior Monk, I just think he looks really, really cool. He's not essential, but it's very useful to have 1 of these guys, or maybe 2. And even the fact that he can be used to represent Liankai, who's a very useful character. You may even be wanting to purchase Liankai separately as well, but I've included this guy in the recommended purchases list because you can't really go wrong with him. Like, if you actually own this model and you run him in every list, that's fine. There's never any reason to drop him from your list unless you absolutely need something else in his place. He's a very, very good unit. Cool, so hopefully that guy gives you guys a bit of direction in terms of where you're going with your little collection, so that once you get started with your games, you can be hitting the ground running, and you can have a really good fighting force ready to go. What I'll be doing now is, of course, running you through the profiles and the abilities and telling you what's hot and what's not, trashing on the bad units, and of course talking up the good units. Let's go. So, Zangchis are the classic, typical line infantry for YuJing. They are a fireteam core option. You don't have many other fireteam core options in this sectorial. The Shang Jis can form a core, but it says down here they can be part of any fireteam, which is why you take 1 or 2 of them and they join other fire teams. If you take 5 of these guys, you break the bank and your list is going to suffer. So I don't really consider them to be a fire team core option. They are a wild card which joins a fire team. So your overall strategy here is, if I just move this down here, is generally going to be making a team that looks roughly like this. So you've got 3 Zangchis, maybe a paramedic, and then you've got a Shang Jin, either the heavy rocket launcher or the machine gun, and always with the tactical awareness if you can have it. And this is going to be the staple. This is going to be the core of your White Banner strategy. So that's what the Zangchis are about. Continuing the conversation, I think the Yi Maos can be core. No, they can't. In fact, it might have just been the Zangchis, unless I'm just forgetting something. We'll come down to it, and we'll be looking at other units individually. But the idea here is that the Zangchis form that backbone of the army in terms of the order generation. You might be looking at that box set which has the special weapons in it, like the sniper and the HMG. If you love that set, there's no harm in buying it, but Just be prepared for the reality that after a lot of games, once you start to really understand Infinity, you're going to start using those miniatures to simply represent combi rifles, because once you start spending all of your SWC points on these big guns, and then you realize, well, actually it's the Shang Jin who's going to be doing all of the shooting when you spend your orders and providing the AROs, you might feel a bit silly for having those particular miniatures in your collection. The Shang Jis, again, they have a much higher ballistic skill, they have much higher armor, and they can sustain 2 wounds rather than 1. So you want them to be actually being the ones rolling the dice, not the Zangchis. So, that is why we recommended the YuJing half of Operation Keldstrom, because they just come with the 3 combi rifle Zangchis in there, which allows you to put together this team. The 5th member, just can be proxied by something else, or, of course, you may have more than one thing join the Zangchis. What some of you guys are going to do, just starting out, you're going to have 3 Zangchis and 2 Shang Jis. So you'll have one guy there for the AROs, that'll be the heavy rocket launcher guy, and then you'll have the AP-HMG in there as well. So when it's your active turn, you're going to be shooting with the AP-HMG, and when it's the reactive turn, everybody's going to be in cover except for your heavy rocket launcher, who's going to be dishing out the punishment to anybody who walks past, and you'll have a doctor nearby to revive either one of these boys if they go down, or even the paramedic if the doctor's not available. So there you go. Moving on to Tiger Soldiers. These guys have always been one of the better combat jump units in the game, and that's because they're relatively cheap, but you sort of pay the points for the 2 or 3 things that really, really matter on a drop trooper. So ballistic skill 13, that's a premium stat for a drop trooper. Armor 2, that's very useful considering that you are going to be taking damage. Inevitably, you drop into enemy territory, you're going to be fighting, and you're going to be there during their active turn as well at some point. But the mimetism is really where it's at for these guys. Mimetism is an ability you don't want to be paying for on cheerleaders who are not fighting, otherwise you're paying too much. But you always want to be paying for it, and you're getting a bargain if your unit is going to be involved in 1 or more face-to-face rolls during the game, because it swings it in your favor. So that's just the long and short of it. In my experience with N4, I've been having a tough time getting drop troopers to work. They are a bit of an investment. You've only got 15 units in your army, so you can't really afford to lose them. And the game has sort of turned into a bit of a meta where a lot of people have little bots around their list with repeaters, and if you get hit by a spotlight, it becomes too easy for them to deal with your Tiger Soldier. There are also a lot of warbands that can sort of dodge and use their dodge movement to come into line of sight of you with their chain rifle in their reactive turn. So it does get difficult. Having said that, the Tiger Soldier is very, very good, and there's no reason to leave him on the shelf. If you love the model, definitely go ahead and buy him. I think all these profiles are actually good, and it's very rare that I would say that. My favorite ones here are the Spitfire, naturally. If you're going to be actually dropping something into their territory, you better be doing something with it, and the Spitfire gives you the best opportunity to win face-to-face rolls, and the Spitfire is almost always going to be at good range bands when it comes on to their half of the table. The other one that I really like here is the Paramedic, because he's a specialist, comes with a combi rifle and a light flamethrower, and is reasonably priced. Boarding shotgun, also very good, because if you can land them very close to the enemy, then the boarding shotgun is punishing. You move, they have to ARO, they choose between dodging and shooting back. If they shoot back at you, well, you could just put down 2 templates and trade with them. Or if they're dodging, you could just roll your dice with +6 to hit with your boarding shotgun and contest their dodge roll. So he is very, very strong in that regard. The combi rifle light flamethrower can essentially do the same thing. It's just the boarding shotgun's a little bit more brutal at that, especially if you're dropping them very, very close. The hacker is a bit of a risk. You don't want to drop next to a repeater and then get hacked yourself. That's a bit of a liability. But I have seen some people try to drop their hacker right next to something which is very sensitive, like a tag or a lieutenant heavy infantry that could be isolated, for example. But it's a very high-risk play when you do that. Alright, the Dao Fei tactical section. This is the guy that came with the Operation Keldstrom starter set. He's a heavy infantry model which has infiltration along with camo state. So these abilities are all very, very good, and they do bundle up into a piece which is very effective. Yeah, so if you're going to be running this guy, the basic Spitfire profile is very, very good, or possibly just the straight-up multi-rifle profile. I don't love that you have to take him as a hacker. That's not great, because if you leave him out there, I mean, your opponent just has one extra way of dealing with him. That is, using a killer hacking device. The Spitfire, I think, is the way to go. It does give you this, the lieutenant option as well. I don't love making him the lieutenant. I'm sure there's some chain of command along here somewhere, but even so, I think there are better lieutenant options than this guy, to be honest. Let's have a look. So Adil can be a chain of command. This guy can't. Yeah, unless you've got a really good chain of command option in your army, I just wouldn't really recommend making him the lieutenant. I've just got to say that. Even the Guilans don't have that. Yeah, so if you're going Dao Fei, make it the Spitfire. The thing I find a little bit regrettable about the Spitfire is that it doesn't have armor piercing. So if you're going up against something which is armor 5 in cover, or if it's a tag, this guy might end up spending a few too many orders trying to cut into something. And the more orders you spend, the more likely it is that you'll eventually get to a point where you just flub your roll, your opponent gets a crit, and he just takes a lot of punishment, and you lose a very powerful piece and the orders you spent on him. So you've got to be careful about that. But he can be amazing at harassing, especially on tables that have a lot of verticality. So if you're playing in a meta where your friends just happen to have these big tall skyscrapers, and you see that these kinds of terrain pieces are used at events quite a lot where you are, this guy can really shine by deploying center of the table on top of a big building, and then he can just roll out and start shooting things at ground level, which he can get access to and line of sight to thanks to his infiltration. So this guy, you don't want to sleep on him, but he's not the best thing in the sectorial either. He's just reasonable. The Guisia. So, sadly, and I'm sorry to say this, guys, both of the tags, this guy and the Blue Wolf, are not particularly good in my assessment, in my evaluation of them. They never have been, and I suspect they may never be really, really good standout pieces. And I'm sorry to say that, and I hate that, because the miniatures are really wonderful. Don't stop this video from, don't allow this video to stop you from going out and purchasing these and painting them up beautifully, if that's what you want to do. I own the Guisia just because I think it looks really cool. I'd happily paint up the Blue Wolf. I think it's really cool, but you just need to understand that if it's your goal to win as many games as possible, to beat the best players, to compete in events, you're kind of hurting your list building effort by including these tags. And let's just explain why. So, first of all, neither of these tags have the remote presence rule, which is kind of significant. It means that if they drop down to unconscious, taking another wound is just going to remove them from the table, Whereas if you're talking about the combined army tags, like the Overdrawn Avatar, all the Pan-Oceania tags, those tags are a bit more resilient because when you drop them down to unconscious, you do another wound, they go down to another level of unconscious. And even more importantly, when engineers go to revive them, they get a reroll with a command token, whereas the Guisia and the Blue Wolf just don't. So if you're in a bit of a pickle, you drop down to unconscious, your engineer goes to repair the Guisia or the Blue Wolf and fails that roll, you don't get the reroll, it's just removed from the table. So it's much less forgiving than those other tags. The next thing is that you're paying some of your points to have the tag be good at close combat, which is a thing. I mean, martial arts level 2, great. Blue Wolf is also very good at close combat, but that's not really what a tag is for. You don't want to be stomping your way over to the other side of the table to get into close combat. You want to be shooting with them. There are other things in the game that are going to be able to beat you in close combat, and if you're getting too close to the enemy, you run the risk of being hacked or hit by something like an Emarat, Cybermind, just something which is going to screw you over. You need to be staying back, and that's what tags do best, moving from the deployment zone to mid-table and back again, and just crushing the things at long range, setting up a great ARO piece with their massive armor. That's what you want to be doing, and these guys are a little bit too overpriced for that. There's also the fact they don't come with any mods like MSV or Mimetism, so when you're trying to beat that Kamau sniper off from the distance, or that Grenza, or that Knight of Justice, or whatever, I mean, it's just going to be straight dice a lot of the time, or in the case of the Kamau, you're at -3. Some tags have the ability to get around their enemy's Mimetism, or to, have Mimetism themselves, which evens things up. So you're going to have some games where you're just really committing to firefights with the Guisia or the Blue Wolf, and they're going to let you down. They're just not that consistent. And when they do let you down and you just drop unconscious, you are, again, at that risk of not being able to revive them and get really what you paid for out of them. It's sad, really. They're really cool pieces, but just at the amount of points you pay for them, then you go and compare what you really get out of the Shang Jis and some of the other units in this army. I'm sorry to say they aren't, super competitive. Speaking of super competitive, though, the Guilan Skirmisher has always been one of the best infiltration units in the game. It really just has a wonderful package of abilities. Anytime you have a unit that has the holy trinity of abilities, which is infiltration, camouflage state, and you're a specialist, you do take the miniature just for those things, because so many scenarios require you to be passing whip checks on objectives, and having a model in camo state allows you to survive until you can do that. It gives you fighting ability. It means you spend fewer orders because you start closer to the objectives. And this guy does all of that extraordinarily well because he's got that premium willpower of 14. He's got multispectral visor level 1 along with his camouflage, so he can actually fight. It's a very useful ability to have because he's going to be out in the midfield up against your opponent's counterparts. So the opponent's version of the Guilan, the Foxtrots and the Crocmen and the Zeros and the Shroudeds and troops like that, you're going to have an advantage against because you ignore their mimetism and they won't ignore yours. So that's a really handy thing to have. Dodge plus 1 inch with a premium physical stat of 12, also very, very useful. And all of the equipment that comes with allows you a lot of choice with the profiles. So my favorites here are the Hacker. Just because hacking is very good in this edition. Very, very useful for any sort of tags, heavy infantry walking past, link teams and whatnot. Or you could set up Spotlight, which is a perfectly legit thing to do in this edition. So that's very, very good. Love the Fort Observer, of course. Very, very cheap. And again, he has all of the advantages I mentioned before. Mine Layer, no problems with that. I mean, if you want to try and stall your opponent, take less of an Alpha Strike hit, you can have 1 or 2 Guilans up and running with mine layers, along with your Longya robots, so you have a lot of mines. Just gives your opponent a bigger field to work through. So those 3 there, Hacker, Mine Layer, Fort Observer, all very, very good. I should note too, the Mine Layer actually has that deployable repeater as well. So if you're playing a bit of a hacking game, you've got a hacker along with your Shang-Chi with the 10 bot and everything, and you want to lay that deployable repeater out there and do some hacking through it, the Guilan gives you the opportunity to do that. Boarding shotgun, wouldn't recommend. He's not a specialist. Lieutenant, again, you don't really want your lieutenant out there, and you pay a full SWC point for him. The multi-sniper, although I like him, you're kind of wanting to be investing your points into something like the Hondun, who's a bit more of a specialist at that camo state shooting. So although the Guilan does have infiltration, you can get up to some really tall buildings, and it can be quite fun. Only take that profile if you really feel like you know what you're doing. Usually, like, if you're in doubt, these other profiles are better. Shaolin Warrior Monks. So we're all lamenting the fact still that these guys aren't really a Fireteam Harris or Core like we felt they should have been. But N4 kind of changed the link team rules weirdly enough so that your irregular order doesn't become a regular order while you're in a link team. At least as far as I can remember. I know the Hungaries in the Morat Sectorial were screwed over by that, but that's okay. You can still take Shaolin Monks for 5 points. This 5-point profile is usually the one you want. If you're really feeling rich, you can splash out on the double action close combat weapon, which is better, but it's always good to save points. 1 Shaolin Monk or 2 Shaolin Monks is fine because they provide smoke, and it's always useful to have at least one source of smoke, because that way you have that opportunity against the opponent who has got no MSV at all, just to block the alleyways in the streets, get onto the objectives, or set up a close combat attack. It's just very useful to be able to have that there at some point. Also very good for defending. You can block with your smoke template on yourself, or sacrifice the Shaolin Monk and do a normal roll to throw the smoke over to something else which is about to get attacked in a few orders' time. Don't forget that sweet little tactic. And let's point out as well that the Shaolin can duo with Jing Gao. Not too sure how to pronounce her name. We'll talk about her a little bit later. She does not have a smoke, so what you can do if you really love Jing is you can take her along with 1 Shaolin Monk, and you can just move the Shaolin Monk as a buddy up with her along through the table, putting smoke templates down, and when she does get into close combat, you can bring the Shaolin with you and get a bonus burst. So that is probably the thing to do if you really want to run Jing Gao. I think she's a bit too expensive for what she does, and a little bit too much of a liability, but if you like her and want to run her, the Shaolin Monk plays a great role there. Just advice here, I wouldn't ever take the boarding shotgun or the smoke grenade launcher over here. This monk has ballistic skill 10. He's not really known for his shooting. What you're wanting to do is basically use him as an annoying skirmisher that just dodges and throws chain rifle templates and smoke grenade templates down around the battlefield. The YuJing Doctor. So, we talked about this. The Doctor is pretty important because you're going to be running the Shang Jin inevitably. So, the Shang Jin is a sizable investment. He does give you a premium gun. He's got tactical awareness, wonderful stats. But if you do get unlucky, and sometimes you will get unlucky in this game, that's just how Infinity works. You're going to be unconscious, and you need to bring it back, and having that Doctor there means that the Doctor, even when she's not doing any duties, she's providing a cheerleader regular order that other models can spend, so that she's fine in that regard. And for that few extra points, you have the ability to bring back a guy that's worth 30 or 40 points. But not just that, he may be the linchpin of your whole game plan. So that's why at least 1 paramedic or doctor is needed. I kind of like the doctor over the paramedic just because a bit more reliable. You actually can use the command token to re-roll your failed, doctoring attempts. So there is that. And if you are running a couple of different sort of centerpiece kind of units, maybe a Fireteam Core with a Shang Jin and then another Harris with a Shang Jin, and they're in different parts of the deployment zone, that's where you take this little Yao Zhao bot for her so that she can actually doctor people from 2 different sides of the deployment zone. Exactly the same thing with the Mecha Engineer, except the Mecha Engineer is there for your robots. If you really wanted to run the tag, Guisia, Blue Wolf, despite my advice, you should still take the Mecha Engineer. Even though he doesn't get the reroll, you still want to give yourself at least the opportunity on a Willpower 13 to bring back the tag if it goes unconscious. But most of the time, the beauty of this guy is going to be in supporting this unit down here, the Long Ya. And that's because this is a super cheap little mine layer guy who's going to be watching the table with his Panzerfaust and Flammen Spear and just annoying the opponent and deliberately getting in their way and just causing them risk and causing them to have to use their really powerful piece to destroy it. And if they get unlucky, they lose. Basically, they're just going to take too much damage. But if they kill you, which is likely, then you can bring them back with that engineer, which is why it's so important to actually have this guy in your list if you're running, between 3 to 6 remotes, which you probably should. Speaking of remotes, the Weibing Yaokong is the basic sensor bot. I don't use these very often. They're a little bit too expensive, and there are other specialists, but they are good. If you're constantly running into opponents who are spamming the midfield with camo, maybe because they're playing a faction like Shazvasti, or maybe Nomads or Ariadne, something like that, and they're just taking a lot of markers, having something with sensor is a good counter to that. You move it up, you reveal them, then you can go into close combat with Liankai, Jing, something like that, or shoot at them with the Guilans. So that's when you'd want to take this guy. As I recommended before, you're going to have all of these remotes in your collection, and sometimes you'll use one of your remotes to represent a Weibing. Other times it'll be this Chai Yaokong Flashbot. So let's just go over this. The Chai Yaokong Flashbot, just 7 points, provides an ARO which is better than a Zangchis combi rifle because it's whip 13 rather than ballistic skill 11, and arguably is even more dangerous because you could stun an enemy tag or heavy infantry model, whereas a combi rifle might just do 1 wound and not actually stop the continued expenditure of orders as they push into your side of the battlefield. So you're going to want a couple of these, but also you might be wanting the TR bot. You can take up to 3 of these guys. So again, sometimes you will want to splash out in more than one, which is why it's so useful to have like 6 of these little robots in your collection. There's the missile bot, which you could be taking. One tactic I used to like with White Banner was to take 2 Guilan hackers out in the midfield, and they're both sort of out in the middle of the table, spread apart, and they've both got an 8-inch zone of control bubble around them, which is sort of almost like a 16-inch across kind of area, diameter. And if you've got 2 of those, that's basically 32 inches worth of space that your opponent has to try and cross past to get to you. And if you're landing spotlights on them, then that sets up the shot for the Sonbei when it becomes your turn, because if they didn't actually reset out of the spotlight by your turn, you just start raining missiles on them, hitting on an 18 with armor piercing and explosive. So again, with your little remote control collection, you could be including that Sonbei in there. And then on top of that, you've still got the long Yars as well. So looking down here, let's say we only took 1 TR bot. You could have the 2 flash pulse bots, the TR bot, the missile bot, and 2 long Yars. And this is not bad. This is actually good list building as far as I'm concerned. We've run out of SWCs in this particular example. Might just zoom in my screen a little bit so you guys can see this a bit more clearly, actually. But realistically, I might not be running the heavy rocket launcher over here with the Shang-Chi, so that gives us plenty of space. So the point is that running lots of remotes is a really, really good idea. Alright, so back to the Shang-Chis. As we talked about, the Shang-Chi is probably the number 1 most important thing in this sectorial. It makes the sectorial work. And one of the reasons for that is just the kind of meta that Infinity Infor is in at the moment. We're seeing a lot of games where there's not really a huge dense amount of terrain, and your opponent is just sitting there watching as much space as they can with 1 ARO piece, which is part of a mixed link team. They've got a lot of cheap troopers, 1 heavy infantry model with a sniper or a missile launcher or something like that, and you've got to somehow crack it. Well, you kind of need armor piercing because it's going to have maybe armor 3 to 5, that kind of thing. And you're going to need a lot of bursts, so you need to be in a link team yourself. And having high ballistic skill is useful, and having a couple of wounds is good because if you lose the face-to-face roll, you take a bunch of damage, there's a chance of you doctoring your guy back up. And the Shang-Chi ticks all of those boxes. Not only that, but he comes with tactical awareness, which gives you an extra order every turn, basically, which is extremely valuable. And the 10 bot, because there's so much hacking going around, that's really, really valuable. If you have to uproot your link team and start trekking across the table, you run into an enemy hacker, they're at -6, even just to spotlight you. So that firewall is very, very useful. So Shang-Chi's really, really important, and it's hard to really see me running hard to see myself running this sectorial without actually using them. So the main link team would usually have one Shang Jin and 4 Zangchis in it. Let's have a look at the other profiles, though, because you may be eyeing up the other models. You may be collecting quite a lot of Shang Jis. So number 1 is this profile here, the Tactical Awareness APHMG. Number 2 profile of interest for me personally is the TAC-Aware Heavy Rocket Launcher. Again, it comes with Tactical Awareness, very important ability. The Heavy Rocket Launcher is very good for AROs, and the Light Shotgun means that he's got that really powerful sidearm up close, very, very useful. Another one I really like is the multi-rifle. Paramedic service are kind of cool if you've got multi-Shang-Jis, and you can actually have a guy out there, especially for the Harris. Love that one. I don't know about the Lieutenant. Again, you want to have the Lieutenant to be something which can hide. I don't really like the chain of command options, so again, multi-rifle non-lieutenant seems okay. It's cool how you can take the tactical awareness one as well for 40 points, although the paramedic also looks quite appealing, especially if you're like in a little Harris and you're moving out and you're sort of out of range of a doctor and one of your Harris friends goes down, paramedic's right there to revive him. So that's a really good profile, but again, hard to pass up tactical awareness, especially since this is a forward observer specialist option. Really, really good. Damn, I mean, these stats are just crazy. He comes with shock as well. So, people with NWI and Dogged that don't have shock immunity, just going to get crushed by this kind of unit. Dodge plus 2 inches, extremely important in this edition, given that you can move in your active and reactive turn, and you can get up from being prone or hit the deck, come around corners, dodge into close combat, activate first, force an arrow out of them, and then dodge into them. It's just really, really powerful. Number 2, also really, really good, because if he's not the link leader, he can actually stop your link from breaking if the link leader does go down. Terrain total, again, if you're playing with the ITS rules that have those stupid localized decompression zones, he's at least walking through those for free. It's just nutty. Physical 14, amazing dodging ability. Armor 4, BTS 6, can't complain about that. Just across the board, really, really strong stats. So hard to go wrong with this guy, indeed. Alright, Rushi. So this is a classic YuJing robot attack piece. It has been weakened a little bit because previously the marksmanship hacking ability supportware that can be put on your robots gave you both the ability to ignore cover and shock ammunition. Now it only gives you the ability to ignore cover. And nowadays crits work a bit differently, so the Spitfire trying to crack a heavy armor piece does struggle a bit more. And for those 2 reasons, I don't particularly love the Rushi as much as I used to. Again, the shooting you're going to be doing is going to be done by that Shang-Ji or something else that's coming along with it in a Harris moving up the board, or maybe like a Dao Fei or Guilan in midfield. The Rushi is still reasonable, especially since you can support him with that Shaolin monk putting the smoke down first. But yeah, I miss the days when my Imperial service, I'd fire the smoke grenade launcher, the Rushi would move up with supportware, do a lot of damage. You can't really do that as easily anymore, at least not with this sectorial. And you're kind of wanting to be supporting this guy with the Evo repeater, but again, the nothing else is going to be using the Evo repeater, so I don't love him. Luduan, similar sort of story. He's similarly priced, but you don't have to spend the SWC. If you can trick somebody with the hollow mask, great, but usually all you'd be doing is pretending to be an Evo repeater. There's nothing else really that's going to be that silhouette 4 shape. I mean, even the long yards are silhouette 3, so it's kind of hard to trick people with it. Yeah, it's tough. I like it how it's got a deployable repeater, so you can run up the board and pop a repeater down and do some hacking, but the Guilan has the ability to do that as well, so yeah, I'm not in love with it. You can use Mine Layer repeater, but again, you're going to have like flash pulse spots in your deployment zone with a repeater anyway. So yeah, I just don't love it. I don't love it. MSV1 is really good because it ignores smoke clouds nowadays, but again, your Guilans are going to be doing the same kind of thing. Yeah, it's just not my favorite unit. It's not bad. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's a decent unit. I'm just not excited about it. Yao Zhao's quite important with doctors and engineers. The Pangualing, I will note that there's the Pangualing FTO repeater here, but there's no rule associated with it on Army Builder for joining core teams and so forth. Maybe it's in the sectorial chart, I don't know, but that just seems like a bit of a missed opportunity. The main idea behind these guys is just taking an 8-point baggage bot here, but there aren't too many models here which really need to reload apart from their long yards. But the thing is, they've got 2 Panzerfausts and 2 Flamen Spears, so they're not going to run out of ammunition completely anytime soon. And because you've got access to all of the other remotes, usually you'd be taking a couple of Yao Kongs as your cheerleaders, because they're 1 point cheaper and they've actually got a flash pulse, which is a bit more meaningful and the way faster, and they've got mimetism. So really, only if you're desperate to save points would you take one of these guys. And again, the Evo Repeater, it's a bit more for supporting a Tiger Soldier or a Luduan. Maybe in a list where you've got both the Luduan and the Tiger Soldier, then I'd take the Evo Repeater. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother, and you'd never take the TR Combi Rifle. It's just not a very good use of total reaction. Okay, the War Corps, obviously, if you've got 3 points left over, these guys are very, very useful. Hondun Ambush Unit, now we're talking. Okay, so the cool thing about these guys is that they have hidden deployment, which is the only thing in this sectorial that has hidden deployment apart from, of course, the kunai, which, again, is a little bit overcosted. Hondun, though, is not really overcosted. It's actually quite reasonably costed, and the profile that is most popular with people is this heavy rocket launcher, for the same reason why the Combined Army Noctifer with missile launcher is really popular. And the thing that this guy does a little bit better than the Noctifer is that he's got slightly higher ballistic skill, and he's got an X-Visor, and the range band of the heavy rocket launcher sometimes works out a little bit better for blasting people that walk across your path, because you've got that between 16 and 32. So dropping a template on them with continuous damage on a 16 can really ruin your opponent's day if they're trying to move out with some sort of coordinated order or link team effort. Especially if they move up to the wall and then walk past the wall on their second short skill, thinking that you haven't got any AROs, you bust out the Hondun, that really cripples them. Where this guy isn't as good is when your opponent's playing quite well, anticipates him, counts up the orders you have on the table, figures out that you've got a Hondun, and really plays around him. That's when this guy can feel like a bit of a mistake, and during that time he's not really contributing an order to your pool every turn. Having said that, I rate this guy a solid above average. This guy would definitely appear in somewhere between 25% to 50% of my white banner lists, at least. They're very, very good. The multi-sniper rifle and shock marksman rifle are fine. These are decent troops, but overall, what this guy does best is the surprise ARO with the heavy rocket launcher. And one other thing that he does better than the Combined Army Noctifer is that if you want to reveal an active turn, use your surprise attack, come out of nowhere, you're rolling 2 dice to hit active turn instead of 1, which could be punishing if they've set up a couple of models which are standing too close together, and you can get that template hit on them. Yi Mao. So these guys are interesting. The medium infantry, I used to struggle to like medium infantry, but Corvus Belli have just started making them better and better and better, especially with 4-4 speed. Super Jump is an ability they have, which is very, very poorly written in N4. It's not nearly as good as it was in N3, and one of the main reasons for that is that getting your actual movement to be legal and working is a lot more punishing now. It's a bit more restrictive. But the thing is, these troops don't rely on Super Jump to be effective. What's really good about them is this combination of MSV1 and Mimetism, so they can actually be real little beasts when it comes to winning face-to-face rolls. The usage of these guys I like the most is just taking a single one of them and forming a Harris team with a couple of wild cards. So if you think about it, you've got a guy for the mid-range with that AP Spitfire. This guy is actually pretty nasty, because if he's trying to tear up a tag or some sort of like Knight of Justice in a link team or something like that, he's at least ignoring any sort of mimetism that they have, but also costing them that -3 mod when they're shooting at him. And he's got the +1 burst from the Link team. Bliss skill starts as 12, that's decent. And the armor piercing value on the Spitfire is very, very useful, because damage 14 on a Spitfire, maybe not enough to crack armor 6, 7, or 8, but with AP in there, you've got a much more efficient way of doing it. At 32 points, he's a bit of a spend, but rather than taking 3 of these guys, I like the idea of bringing in some wildcards. So you've got the Tiango. This guy comes with a jammer. I love the idea of just popping the boarding shotgun grenades jammer in with him and pretending that he's either Lei Gong or a Shang Jin or just another Yimao. But you've gotten away with a cheaper member of your Link team so that you can afford it in the first place. And if you're moving out to the middle of the table to get some shots off with your AP Spitfire and you're camping in a building or something, you've got the protection of that jammer for when they come towards you to try and flush you out with a chain rifle or getting into close combat. And then you can round out the team either with Lei Gong for a reasonably costed option. I keep saying that there was no chain of command option. Excuse me, Lei Gong is actually a very good chain of command option, so we should probably come back here and actually say that if you're going to be taking the Lieutenant Spitfire Doubtfei, that can give you an extra order out in the midfield, and Lei Gong can act as the chain of command. So excuse me, I know there's going to be like 5 or 6 people who've already chastised me in the YouTube comments before they've got to this point in the video. Whatever. But yeah, Lei Gong makes a good addition to that Harris. What you might be doing instead, though, is going back to those beautiful Shang Jis and taking either the multi-rifle Shang Jin. I probably wouldn't with the AP Spitfire already there. I'd be going with the heavy rocket launcher, because then with your little Harris here, you've got a brutal midfield piece with that Yimao, a very useful short-range guy with the Tiango, and that long-range ARO piece on the heavy rocket launcher. So this particular group loadout has a really good tool for a set of different options, meaning that they are well equipped to just game after game after game providing value, just taking you to Value Town with that little trio. And with this setup that I've shown you here, 1 Shang Jin in the core, 1 Shang Jin in the Harris, you're at 188 points. You can still afford a lot of robots, but you've done it with just all these guns and order efficiency with 2 tactical awareness orders in there. So I feel like the Yimao is a good unit for setting all of that up. These other profiles, look, they're fine. It's more about his MSV1 and his mimetism. All of these other profiles are reasonable. I just think that the AP Spitfire is really where it shines. If you're setting up just an ARO piece missile launcher, you'd kind of want to be in a fire team core, ideally. Killer Hacker, he doesn't have marker state. Again, you'd be worried about some idiot like Bit and Kiss just firing a repeater next to you, or Valeria Gromos doing that with like a Drew's Killer Hacker and then just wiping you out. It's just a bit of a liability. So yeah, my recommendations, the AP Spitfire. None of the other profiles are terrible, but the AP Spitfire is just my recommendation. So the Jujak. The Jujak is, I mean, there are some things that this guy does that the Shang-Chi doesn't, and he's definitely cheaper than the Shang-Chi, so if cost is an issue, then great, the Jujak's cool. I love it how they've all got flamethrowers, but at the end of the day, you're really going to notice the difference between having tactical awareness or not having tactical awareness, having armor 4 versus armor 3, physical 14 versus physical 12. Just stuff like that's really going to come back to bite you. And quite importantly, this guy can join Shang-Chi, but he can't join the Zangchis or the Yimaos, whereas the Shang-Chi can do that. And you're not going to be wanting to make like a full fire team of Shang-Chis just so the Jujaks can join them. I mean, it's doable, but it's just not an efficient list. You could have Shang-Chi APHMG, Shang-Chi Heavy Rocket Launcher, you could put the Tiango in there, you could put Lei Gong in there, then you could have a Jujak. But why though? I mean, you're doing it just because you can. I just don't see what the point of it is when you could have a setup like this, what I've just shown you, with the Shang-Chi nicely costed into a Shang-Chi link, Zangchi link, very efficient, and then this nice punishing and very mobile Harris group. Really like that. So the Jujak, I really struggle with them. It's cool you can have an engineer in there. He's got some good guns. You can still take the Panzerfaust firewall guy. The Shang Jin can also have a firewall. It's just a hard sell. I feel like this guy might be a bit more appropriate in white company that can also take him, and I think has some better options for mixing him up. So yeah, I don't love him. Blue Wolf, I talked about this guy before. I mean, you guys are going to be looking at this list of abilities and just licking your chops. And I can understand a new player's view of all of this stuff. You're just looking at how cool he is with his massive claw, and you're fantasizing about him racing across the battlefield and berserking people. Yeah. At the end of the day, no remote presence. He's only armor 6. When he does get into enemy territory to berserk things, you just don't want to be trading him when he costs 71 points, and somebody could just Emarat him or hack him, and he's a goner, and you end up losing because the 71 points you spent on him meant that the rest of your list is kind of a little bit undergunned and a little bit underwhelmed. So yeah, I'm sorry to say it. I wish this guy was better. To change him, I feel like, if he had camouflage state, that would be really, really cool. Or if he was just a whole lot cheaper, like in the high 50s, then you could treat him like you would treat a heavy infantry model. I just don't really feel it. Fire team duo maybe, but again, anything that you're going to be duoing with him is going to be pretty expensive as well. I'm just not really seeing it, guys. I'm sorry. Gong. So again, my apologies for not mentioning the fact that he's a chain of command. That is important. That is a big deal. If you're going to be running this guy over here, the Kian Gao dude, or the Dao Fei, or the lieutenant version of the Shang Jin, Gong is what you want to be doing. And 32 points, it's not completely breaking the bank. It's very useful that it's got immunity shock, NWI. I've always been a fan of this guy. MSV1 is better than ever nowadays with the new rules in N4 allowing you to see through smoke. Albedo is relevant. There are going to be some games where your opponent's MSV stuff isn't in a link team, so the Albedo ability to actually shoot at them. I mean, you come up against something like a Marut. Gong could potentially rush up the middle of the table with the Harris and his shock marksman rifle. The Albedo sets you up, and you're hitting on 13s on 4 dice AP. That Marut's trying and struggling to hit you on a 9 with 1 dice. Could be a good way of shredding a unit like that. I think he's very, very good. The Blitzen's also very good, and the same with an Nanopulsar. Those are both good weapons to have in a link team, because the additional burst applying to a Nanopulsar or a Blitzen makes those weapons very, very effective. 32, 34 points, you may end up not being able to afford him. Can be better to just go with something a bit cheaper if you're not going to be using his abilities, but I think he's very, very good. I love the fact that he's 6'2" speed as well. The model's very cool. I'm not too sure if they've come up with a general release version for him for Infinity, but obviously the Aristia miniature is perfectly fine to be converted into your N4 games. Really big fan of this guy. And of course, wildcards, so that's amazing for joining the aforementioned teams. The Harris I think is really my preference for where you'd be wanting to go with him. Alright, Kian Gao, this guy. So if you're going to be taking him at all, it's going to be for this Lieutenant +1 order thing here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I just couldn't see anything in this sectorial that has NCO. NCO is an ability where your unit can spend the Lieutenant's order as if it was a regular order, essentially. And that's where Lieutenant +1 is really, really good. I feel like if anybody should have NCO, it should be the Jujaks, just to make them a little bit more compelling. But I'm just not seeing any NCO abilities through here at all, which means that Kian Gao is going to be, using it by himself and not in a link team, because that's going to break the link team. So if he joins a group, which is ultimately where he needs to be, he's going to be breaking the group if he uses that Lieutenant +1 order. And he can only join Shang Jin. So again, for the reasons I mentioned before, you don't want like a super expensive group of Shang Ji. You want the one Shang Ji to join a group of inexpensive troops. That's just how link teams work. Should mention, this is being recorded 7th of September. I have heard that Corvus Belli are going to be updating. I don't want to say fixing. I want to say updating the mixed fire team rules. Things may change as of the next ITS. We'll see. I'm sorry, guys. I just wouldn't recommend this guy. He was, a carryover from the Defiance board game. They wanted to give him rules, and you just compare him to this guy over here, the Shang Ji APHMG, for 49 points. I mean, the same number of points, same number of SWCs, but you get a guy with the way better dodge ability. He's got the firewall, he's got armor piercing, he's got tactical awareness. There's just no comparison. Just no comparison whatsoever. Jing Gao, don't know how to pronounce that QO part, but she's packed out with abilities. Amazing in close combat, great at dodging, mimetism with the multi-rifle for shooting, NWI, climbing plus, she's a specialist, great close combat sword. The problem with her is that she doesn't have shock immunity, and I'm sorry to say, that's just a little bit too much of a problem for me, because there are too many things in this game that have shock. You're talking shock mines? You're talking multi-rifles, submachine guns, multi-marksman rifles, multi-HMGs. The list continues to go on. Some models even just have shock built into their profile. So an enemy Shang Ji with BS attack shock that just hits her with a stray HMG bullet and she goes down. 36 points is just such a painful investment if that happens. If you do want to run her, I really would again recommend taking that one Shaolin monk, just so you can sacrifice the Shaolin monk into the minefield, so he moves up, tries to dodge the mines. Quite often he'll just clear the mines by dodging them, and then, if he does die, Jing is clear to move through. Hopefully the Shaolin may have thrown a smoke grenade for her to walk into. But yeah, I mean, this game's full of stuff like crazy koalas and hacking and just things that can trade into her with a chain rifle. For 36 points, it's just a hard ask. It's not like Uxia McNeil where you're infiltrating onto the other side of the battlefield and trading her with something extremely important on their side of the board. You've got to actually spend the orders walking at 4/4 speed all the way over to their position and then attacking, and you run the risk of spending all of those orders and the points onto this miniature, which then dies. So if you're going to play her, just keep a diary of your games. I think over a span of like 10 games, you'll start to see where her strengths and weaknesses are. I wouldn't really, go, okay, I've played one game with this miniature, I happen to have a good time, every single game's going to be like that. She's just a bit too inconsistent in the long run, I assure you. Liankai, on the other hand, is the piece that you want to be taking if you like that kind of role, if you want to be moving out with a close combat specialist and causing disruption and just getting up in their grill and beating people up at close range. This is the model you want to do with it because he's way cheaper, he's equally good in close combat, if not better, has the berserk ability which Jing doesn't. He still has NWI, and no shock immunity, but at least he's 21 points rather than 36. And look, he's not spending those extra points on the shooting with Jing. Instead, you're getting that chain rifle light shotgun, which makes him equally as dangerous close range with the shooting. He has super jump, which Jing doesn't. She's got climbing plus. I probably prefer climbing plus, actually. But yeah, all the dodging ability is very good, and he even deploys further out. There's just no comparison. You really want to be taking Liankai over Jing Gao any day. Note that you could take both Liankai and Jing Gao. I just don't think that's a good idea because you're putting those expensive eggs into one basket and you're missing out on the opportunity for that Shaolin because Liankai would be taking the place of the Shaolin and then you have no smoke. So yeah, wouldn't recommend that. I'd recommend Liankai. Oh, just almost forgot, he has Impetuous, so he's got another free order to get closer into the middle of the table, which Jing doesn't have. Octavia Grimsdottir, terrible, terrible, terrible unit. Just a meme. You want to be taking this guy here, the Hondun heavy rocket launcher. You would never, ever take the Octavia Grimsdottir profile, ever. Unless you're running in a memes tournament. That's another story. Kunai Ninja Solutions, exactly the same thing. If you want a hidden deployment sniper, you want the Hondun, because the Hondun is just paying the points for that awesome gun and the ability to shoot it. Better ballistic skill, X-Visor, whereas this guy is paying more points and you're getting a close combat ability you're not going to be using because you're too far back, you're trying to shoot. It's very difficult in this game to both be a sniper and a close combat specialist. It just doesn't really work. And for the Shock Marksman Rifle version, again, you don't want to be this guy who's moving out in the middle of the table and just not really having great ballistic skill and just revealing yourself and just losing the face-to-face role. If you want somebody for that role, you should be running this guy, the Dao Fei, or this guy, the Guilan. Both of those guys are much better choices for midfield shooting and overwhelming them with good stats and abilities. Imperial Agent Adil Memo. This guy's from that Betrayal comic, character from that, and he's another Chain of Command option. I'm surprised to see him on White Banner because he's more of like an ISS-themed trooper. He's a wild card, which is cool, but there's always a but with these kinds of guys. I just don't know what he brings. He's a specialist, but you're going to be joining a fire team that has a specialist in there anyway. He's just got a breaker combi rifle and no MSV or mimetism or anything, so usually you'd be wanting the Shang Jin to be doing your shooting. I mean, for similar points, you've got this Yi Mao over here who's priced similarly but has MSV1 and mimetism and just misses out on that additional wound. Oh, sorry, my bad. This guy doesn't have 2 wounds. He's got NWI instead. Where is his shock immunity? Tell me that. Am I just blind? Does this guy just have NWI, no shock immunity? So that suffers from the same problem that Jing does. You accidentally run into something with shock, and the game is just full of shock. Every man and his dog has got shock ammunition. A deal can just be like this really expensive blip on their radar that just becomes crushed underfoot. It's really hard to justify the idea of him. He's got some cool kit like the MA2 monofilament, but I mean, I just talked about the fact that you want to be either shooting from long range and just focusing your points and your abilities to doing that most cost efficiently, or you want to be in the midfield and focusing all your points and your abilities to most cost effectively be chopping their head off. It's very hard to be doing both of them unless you're like Achilles and you're going to be rushing through the table, all of your orders going into him. He's going to be doing some close combat, some shooting, and he's just got the world revolving around him. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for Adil, who kind of needs to take a bit more of a back seat. I don't love it. Triangulated fire and sensor in there, that's kind of cute. I mean, it's very Imperial Service-y. They're just situational abilities that, you know, aren't going to be providing value game after game after game, which is kind of what you want to be going for. Tiango, it's very cool that these guys have Hollow Mask and the old Jammer. I'm still a fan of Jammers, although it might just be because I played so much N3. They're definitely not as good as they used to be, but it's nice to have them. They can be clutch in situations where your opponent is about to just bag you with a Speculo Killer or Uxie McNeil, and they've just moved in for the kill, and they've taken out that one piece which is standing between them and your lieutenant, but then you jammer them, which is pretty cool. The boarding shotgun profile, I like that because it adds in that additional template to your little team. So if you join the Zangchis core, you've got something which can actually blast them close range. Or with the Yi Mao Shang Jin group, I quite like that in there as well. Boarding shotgun being a little bit nastier than the light shotgun from the Shang Jin. These other guys, though, yeah, I mean, they're all good in their own ways. Mad Traps are very, very useful. It's just you start to sort of give away the fact you've got the Tiango in your army when the Mad Traps are there, so it's harder to conceal them. The reason why I like the first section version is that your opponent might forget that you have the capability for a jammer just sitting around in your line, and they come too close towards you and they actually just get hit by that jammer, or they think they're creeping up on a basic Zangchi, and your reaction is to lay down a boarding shotgun template that they weren't expecting. So that's why I'd really prefer the first section boys here. Lastly, the Yaofeng Long Ya, if you can, the Mine Layer option. I think it's so strong because this is a game where you can't really afford to have your order pool gutted. You can only take 15 models in your list, and if your opponent's alpha striking, you need to have lots of little bits and pieces in the way to prevent taking critical hull damage here to your army. So the Mine Layer, I mean, he's just so cheap. Comes with 3 different guns, so the Panzerfaust +1 burst, might add, Flammen Spear, SMG for short range. Still has camouflage state. You could forward deploy him, which is important because you can keep him back and put the mine a bit further forward. Really like that. And he's almost cheap enough to be a cheerleader, even though he's something which presents such a threat to your opponent. And after your opponent finally discovers him and puts him down with a long-range HMG, you can just spend 1 order to revive him with your engineer, and he's back again, which is why it's just golden. You can have a couple of these in your White Banner list, and honestly, this is one of the highlights, one of the reasons to play White Banner in the first place. I definitely recommend buying those remote packs so that you can have them sitting around. So yeah, just before we finish up today, I might just throw in a little bit of a list so I can just sort of show you what I would kind of run. It's pretty straightforward. We take the engineer, we take the doctor as well, and we're almost up at the full points allocation. So we got 5 there, 3 there, 2 long yards, Liankai. You might change your groups around here. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've still got 15 points left over, which tells me that I might not even need that Yao Kong there. So with 22 points, I'd probably be more likely to try and squeeze in the Guilan, which means that I can probably drop the points. So if I decided I didn't want Liankai after all, that takes me down to 13. I come back and grab the Chai Yi. There we go there. And that allows me to afford the Yao Zhaos for the Doctor and the Engineer. Perfect. So I've got 300 points, 6 SWCs. Let's just have a look at the list. So for active turn gunning down of enemy arrow pieces like their hideous Kamau Sniper or Grenzer and their Tunguska Link team, we've got the Shang Jin APHMG in his group there. And if he goes down, we've got the Paramedic or the Doctor to bring him back. If we need to take the fight to the other guy, we've got this little group here to move out with the heavy rocket launcher, AP Spitfire. These guys are real damage dealers, and after they've finished spending all their orders, they just camp in some little building or behind a wall, and they've got that jammer ready to spring. In the reactive turn, we've got the mine layers defending, possibly the heavy rocket launcher defending with a Zangchi, Yisheng, Yao Zhao next to him. And defending our line as well, we've got the Shaolin, the Hacker as well. That makes things kind of handy if they come too close to us with heavy infantry or tag. I like it, man. This seems like a really fun list to play. Let me know how you guys go with the White Banner. I'll hopefully be putting together some more bat reps with them in the near future. But for now, yeah, really enjoyed bringing you the strategy, advice, and review as always. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and hopefully have a really good week.